So hi everyone, thank you for joining us. We'll get started in just a moment, but I see the list is still populating and I'll go over our format in a moment.
Oh, wow. We have already a lot of people.
Excellent. Thank you everyone for coming. This is very exciting. So I am Professor Greer Muldowney from the Art, History, and Film Department. I teach photography and I am one of the co-representatives of Currents. And we're very excited to welcome Gabriel Sosa to speak with us today. So just a couple of things and a quick introduction, and then I will hand the mic over to Gabriel. Currents Presents is a lecture and discussion series by local thinkers and makers, which is always free and open to the public in whatever format we are working in, including this one this evening. Currents is supported by a TAME grant from the Office of the Provost at Boston College. We have two more speakers in the series this semester. Next month, we have Maria Multaney on Thursday, November 12th at 12:10 p.m. and Penny Siopsis, who is also in the Indian Ocean Show at the McMullen Museum currently on November 19th, with more information forthcoming for both of those talks. So without further ado, I am very excited to introduce Gabriel Sosa to you. He's a local artist of many hats, also a personal friend, and sometimes even a collaborator with myself. Gabriel Sosa is an artist, curator, educator, linguist based in Boston, but originally from Miami, Florida, which will be a central point of this talk. Through a multidisciplinary practice that includes drawing, video, and public installation, he combines interests in translation, memory, and social justice to explore how the use of language subtly and consistently shapes our everyday experiences. His work has been shown at Miami Poetry Festival, Tufts University Art Galleries, Centro Cultural Español in Miami, La Fábrica de Arte Cubana Havana, Area Boston, and the Contemporary Jewish Museum in San Francisco. And his work can currently be seen at Creating in COVID, curated by Rachel Kay, which is online. Also online, Perceive 19, organized by Aeroporto Laboratorio, and will be participating in an upcoming group exhibition of video work at the Museo La Tortilla in Cali, Colombia. He was one of the curators of the Area Code Art Fair 2020, the first art fair focused on artists with ties to the New England area that just happened this past August, and has also organized exhibitions at the Nave Gallery in Somerville and Haley House in Roxbury. He has been an artist in residence at Lugar de Dudas in Cali, Colombia, Santa Fe Art Institute in Santa Fe, New Mexico, Mass MoCA, and the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History in Santa Cruz, California. He is currently a Now and There Accelerator Fellow and a visiting lecturer at the Massachusetts College of Art and Design. Sosa will be tracing how his upbringing in Miami and his experiences as an interpreter in the Massachusetts court system has influenced his work and led to his fascination with the subversion of language in the public space. So without further ado, I welcome Gabriel. And if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A section box in the bottom, and we will read those to Gabriel at the end of the lecture. And thanks again for everyone for coming.
All right. Thank you very much. Let's go ahead and share my screen. Thank you, Greer, for that lovely introduction, and thank you, Boston College, for having me here tonight, and thanks for everyone for joining me. So as Greer said, tonight I really want to talk about things that have influenced me, my work as an interpreter, my experience growing up Cuban American in Miami. And so we're also going to talk about my personal fascination with text, which I hope some of you tonight share in. So I just want to go ahead and read this out loud. I'll read it in Spanish first, and then I'll translate it. Conozco a, por más de 9 años. Somos del mismo pueblo. Me ayudó mucho cuando llegué a este país. Siempre lo puedo llamar amigo. I've known for over 9 years. We're from the same town. He helped me a lot when I came to this country. I can always call him a friend. So in one of my many lives, one of the hats I wear is that of an interpreter. For just over a decade now, I've worked as a court interpreter in the Massachusetts court system. So that means that I am simultaneously interpreting legal proceedings from English into Spanish for defendants, for witnesses, for people who exclusively speak Spanish in the Boston area that found themselves, for a multitude of reasons, wrapped into the court system. Sometimes that translation is consecutive. If someone is giving testimony, I go up to the witness stand with them. I have a little notebook. The question will be posed in English. I'll translate that into Spanish. The person testifying gives their answer in Spanish. I take notes, translate that back into English, and put it on the record, and so forth. Occasionally, I'm doing written translations as well, and that's where this particular series comes from. It's called Letters of Support, and they have been influenced by a particular sort of a legal gesture, you could even call it, where quite often in the court system, not just in Massachusetts, but across the United States, whenever someone is pleading guilty to a crime, their defense attorney will often kind of rally together people in that defendant's circle, whether it be personal or professional, to write some letters testifying to the personal characteristics and virtues of that person. So that way, if that person pleads guilty, then they're able to hand up those letters to the judge, to the prosecutor, and say, hey, look, you know, this client is a human being. He means something. He means something to people in the community, or she or they mean something, and they should be given some consideration. And so sometimes I've had to translate these, and they really give me some pause. They have given me pause to think about how it is that we remember others, how it is that we use those memories to define others and also to define ourselves. I'm the aunt of, I've known since they were born. He's a good guy. He's responsible. He helps out when it's necessary. For example, if someone needs a job, he'll tell them where they can go look for work. I met, had a job. He was an excellent coworker, honest, hardworking, respectful, honorable. He's a good friend. He would always support me. He would give me advice. He's someone I could always count on. He was always pushing up his friends. He used to like to fish and go to the movies. And so it's interesting for me to revisit these pieces. I had made these pieces actually while I was in graduate school here in Boston at SMFA. And before graduate school, I would say I never made work with text in it. I was often kind of inhibited by it or intimidated. I felt that there was just this kind of legibility to it that was unequivocal, that there wouldn't be any kind of room for interpretation, and it was just sort of set in stone. But in my work as an interpreter, I started to realize really that wasn't true. I think also just growing up in Miami, I grew up in a Cuban family, born and raised in the 305, and Miami, I think it's so unique in the US in that it's truly a bilingual city. And Miami has so many languages, as does Boston, but Spanish is definitely the most dominant one. And kind of growing up in this culture where you're not only bilingual, but you are also bicultural, just kind of constantly going back and forth between English and Spanish and switching this chip and these codes. And so, you know, and actually, I think maybe the only place I've been that's kind of like that would be Montreal, which is so close by. But in Montreal, it's kind of it's by law, right? Everything has to be in French, everything has to be in English. Whereas in Miami, it's just kind of a de facto way of living. And so my work as an interpreter kind of really reinforced a lot of that for me. And so as I was looking immediately at what was around me and what I was doing every day, being in court and participating in all of these hearings that ranged from evictions to divorce to murder to drug cases to child custody, I would then go to class and was immediately just kind of constantly responding to what I was seeing in court, and very much still am. At the same time, once I started to kind of embrace working with text, I dove pretty deeply into my own history and my own background to do a little more excavating. I came across this. It's a letter that my grandfather wrote to his sister-in-law at the time that this was written, which you can see the date there, June 11th, 1979, written in Miami, my 5,382nd day of exile. So my family, like so many families in Miami, left Cuba shortly after the revolution, which was in 1959. And there was sort of a series of different waves of members of my family coming to the US and going to Miami specifically. And my grandparents left in the late 60s. My grandfather in particular was not only a patriot, but a politician, a prominent member of his local community in Havana and also in Jatibonico, which is it's the town where my family's originally from. For those of you that have read 100 Years of Solitude, it's sort of like Cuba's Macondo. It's a small town smack in the middle of the island, full of strange and eccentric characters where all kinds of zany things happen. And I came across this letter on a trip to Cuba, which I, like many people in my generation that grew up in Miami, didn't go to Cuba for the first time until I was 26. But on one of those trips, I came across this, I was given this letter. And what struck me most about it is how my grandfather kept track of all of the days since he had left Cuba, to be able to say, this is my 5,382nd day of exile. And so that letter led me to make this. It's a video piece I'm going to share just a short clip of.
That'll never happen again. Esta es la última vez que acompaño a los abuelos a un velorio de eso. Mom, please, next time, let them go by themselves, okay?
Pero niño, ¿qué pasó?
Mom, that funeral was like a cocktail party. You know what I mean? Nothing but gossip. Fulanito de tal, que ven, y cocodito, que ven. Los chismes estaban que hacían olas. And the abuelos were the worst.
Tú vi lo desmejorado que estaba Benito Pérez.
¿Qué me dices de Tomasito Núñez? Está hecho leña, hay leña.
Qué barbaridad, no, es que la vida es muy dura en este país.
Miami, Florida, 11 de junio de 1979, a los 5.382 días de ausencia. Querida Hilda, cabe lo posible que esta carta te sorprenda por inesperada. Durante largos años he permanecido en silencio, aún con mis hijos, que todos están más o menos distantes, aunque dentro del propio país. No tuve decisión suficiente para hacerte ni siquiera una notica, cuando el destino te golpeó tan terriblemente. ¿Qué decir en esos casos? ¿Cómo puede un desconsolado consolar? Por mucho que lo trato, no me puedo explicar el porqué de mi reacción ante una sola frase escrita por René. ¿Y de Juanito? ¿Qué me cuenta?
So, Que Pasa USA was a sitcom that ran on PBS from 1976 to 1979. It was produced by the local PBS station in Miami. And it was really unique because it was completely bilingual. And so it was about this Cuban family that was living in Hialeah, Miami. And all together under one roof, you had the grandparents who were very tied to the culture of the island in its language, in its customs, and its traditions. You had the parents who, in many ways, they still were, but also kind of slowly adapting to life in Miami, which was much more anglicized at that time in the 1970s than it is today, and than it was when I was growing up in the 90s. And then the kids, the young man you see in the background in the rocking chair, who you might recognize from Scarface, is one of two teenagers, Godmeng and Joe. And so they're in high school, and for them it's a little bit different. They still very much embrace and appreciate so much of Cuban culture, but in many ways are much more so quote unquote Americanized. In this particular episode, it's interesting because the grandmother, Adela, starts to feel that she is being ignored, and she starts to feel that her kids aren't interested in her anymore, that her grandkids don't appreciate her. And so she threatens to leave. And she says, you know what, I'm gonna go back to Guanabacoa, which interestingly enough, it's actually the neighborhood in Havana that my mom grew up in. And what's also unique about that is that especially in the 1970s, travel between Cuba and the United States was extremely restricted. There were a lot of people leaving, but not many people going back at all. And so there was a certain irony in the Abuela Adela threatening to return to Cuba. And so I was thinking about my own generation, all of my close friends in Miami, and I just kind of under different circumstances started going to Miami all around the same time. One of our close friends went the year before I did, then I went, and it was someone else the next year. And so I started to think about the effect that this show, which even though it ran in the 70s, I grew up with the reruns, and it's still rerunning today. They even have an Instagram page, a Facebook page. There was a play made about it. And thinking about the effect that show had had on me and how emblematic it was of my upbringing, and still, even today, for people growing up in Miami in a Cuban American family. And so what I did is I paired the letter that that my grandfather had written with this show, with this particular episode. And in that sense, really kind of played into this relationship between text and image. So, and actually, that piece takes up the entire episode and a little more. It's an entire half-hour episode, but just wanted to show you guys a little clip tonight. And so I started to think a lot about Cuba and its relationship to me and Miami and growing up there. And so this is actually the house that my mom grew up in the aforementioned Guanabacoa neighborhood. And so no members of my family live here anymore. In the 1960s, the entire house was occupied by my family. And now, today, it's been split into 3 different apartments. So it's the first floor, the second floor, the garage, And I had always seen this house in pictures. And when I went there for the first time, and I went with my family that still lives in Cuba, it was such a poignant, powerful experience for me. I think, all of us who grow up Cuban in Miami constantly kind of hear these stories where Cuba becomes this sort of legendary place, and it's always there, but it's not. It's always present. It's always influencing you. It's always influencing people around you and plays such a prominent role in your life. But so many people have never been there. And so for me, every time subsequently I have gone to Cuba, I have gone to this house. Even at one point when my wife and I were in Havana, we went to see the ballet one night, and we ran into the young man that lives on the second floor of this house. So just kind of developing this relationship with it, and thinking about the role that history plays in my work. Here's just a couple of images. The look from the look out from the balcony. And then my visits to the house and thinking about absence and presence and place led me to create this work. It was a series of drawings where I had actually been given a small bag from the family that lives on the first floor of that house you just saw the photos of. And it was a bag of dirt from the garden. So I took that soil and literally mixed it into this paper that I made, and had taken different photographs that I had both taken in Cuba as well as images of, or rather photographs that had been bestowed to me by my family from generations ago, and then started to create these transfers on these drawings. So this piece, it's actually quite large. It's about 4 feet by 8 feet, and then I have a few close-ups of it here. So again, kind of like thinking about text and thinking about the role of text in language in our own stories, and how for so many of us, our memory becomes our own reality. Whether or not it's right, it may be completely inaccurate, but for us, that's what it was, and that's how we lived it, and that's our truth. And I've really become so fascinated in my work by the role that language and word choice starts to play in that. So as you can see these close-ups, you'll see these bits of text that start to emerge from these transfers. Here's another portion of it. It's a two-part piece. Now, I think a lot about how it is that that people remember us, how it is that we remember others, the way that those memories change over time. And so what you're looking at now is a series of drawings that very much kind of springs from these ideas, thinking about Cuba, thinking about my work in court. And it's a piece called Le Queda un Minuto. And so with Le Queda un Minuto, one of the things I do as an interpreter in court is I actually am often asked to take tape recordings that are recordings of jail calls that are made from inmates to their family members. So it's interesting because at any jail, and some of you who maybe have listened to the Serial podcast, you think about the opening recording to that, and how it's a warning saying that all of these calls are recorded. And every call is recorded unless it's a call between an attorney and client. But so often as an interpreter, I have often been hired by the prosecutor's office to listen to these tapes and transcribe and translate them. And it's because the prosecutors are looking for some kind of incriminating evidence against these detainees. And what I find so interesting about this is that all too often there's nothing incriminating in these calls, right? It's actually more just kind of day-to-day things. Hey, how are you doing? How's school? How have you been? I miss you. I love you. And there's also a time limit to these calls. So a lot of times people will be in the midst of conversation, often perhaps a really heartfelt one. And just like that, it's cut off. So I started to create this piece where little kind of snippets from these calls were inspiring these drawings. And then it's called Le Queda un Minuto, which literally in English, it means you have 1 minute left. And there's always a 1 minute warning on these phone calls. And so I was just thinking about how just with trying to find what it is that someone's saying, maybe if something they're saying is damaging to them, and having that translated. And again, the role of language in the justice system, how the importance of language and translation, all too often, it's sort of this double-edged sword. It's something that can save you, but also something that can completely condemn you, right? And so also thinking about how there's so much work that has to go into this process. Not only does then the jail have to take these calls, give them to the prosecutor's office. The prosecutor's office has to go through them, see what might be interesting, pass them to the interpreter. The interpreter listens to them, transcribes them, translates them, passes them back to the prosecutor. The prosecutor reads through all of them, looking for something that's relevant to that case. And so you have all of these machinations of the justice system in full force, but often it's kind of for nothing. But then at the same time, there's my own personal qualms about it, because that at the same time is also how I make a living, is working in the court system. So thinking about the role of language, how it is often disposable, how it can be something forgettable, but other times unforgettable. And this idea of having these crumpled papers and being able to search through and look and discard and re-examine. I want to just go back quickly here. So I'm going to share with you another video piece. So again, the role of memory, right? And how it is that we define our own realities, even if our memories are completely inexact. There's so many studies and histories about how fallible memory is. This particular piece, I'll show you this piece in its entirety. It's just about 3 minutes. I'll just go ahead and hit play, and then we can talk about it for a minute after.
Mira, Benny, te debo cartas, te debo agradecimientos por tu ayuda, te debo muchas cosas, pero he intentado varias veces iniciar una carta, pero tengo capacidad disminuida ya para expresarme. Y me parece que que a lo mejor te pone triste lo que te digo, pero a lo mejor te pone alegre, pero bueno, te estoy hablando, que es lo mejor. Te quiero mucho, te admiro mucho, mucho, sé de muchas cosas que has pasado, sé cómo las has enfrentado y te admiro, siempre fuiste muy valiente, siempre fuiste atrevida y pienso y te veo tan bonita, tan joven y te quiero y no sé ni qué decirte. Aquí en el patio de mi casa te estoy hablando y tu sobrino es un amor y los quiero mucho a todos. Y ya me estoy emocionando, ya estoy hecha una vieja cañenca que se emociona por todo. Pero bueno, estoy aquí siempre, siempre queriéndote y recordándote. Y testigo de eso es que mis hijos te conocían ya, antes de conocerte. Ya te conocían. Porque siempre les hablé de ti con mucho amor. Y los recuerdos que tenemos juntos son muy, pero muy fuertes. Te deseo lo mejor del mundo. Sé que estás cuidando de tu nieta. Sé que eso es una labor. Mis nietos están lejos de mí. No los pude. A la Marila estuvo 4 años conmigo aquí en la casa, pero ya después voló. Y siempre los estoy añorando. Ya ella se me ha convertido en una muchacha. Y el otro Benjamín, vaya, para que es una maravilla de criatura. Bueno, te quiero mucho, cuídate y ya ves que tan lejos y abrazamos la misma profesión. Estoy también de maestra, todavía. Bueno, un beso bien grande, un abrazo bien fuerte. Que Dios te bendiga, que bendiga a toda tu familia, que de hecho ya por estar tú al frente está bendecida. Un beso, un abrazo. Siempre te quiere tu prima y siempre te recuerda. Chao.
So that piece, and I just want to go back to that slide for a moment. It was a sound recording that I had made with Marina, she's a cousin of mine. She is the first cousin of my mother and my aunt. My aunt is the Benita, the Benny referred to in this video, and the two of them were the same age. And as I said in the subtitle at the beginning of the video, when they were both 18, it's when my aunt, my mom's side of the family left Cuba for the United States. And so when I was in Cuba at a certain point, and I was sort of out of everyone in my immediate family, I was the first one to go back to Cuba in decades. And I was in Havana, and I had gone to Jatihuanico and visited our family there, come back, and Marina had called me and said, hey, can you record a message for me and maybe play it for Benita when you get back to the US? And I said, yeah, sure, let's do it. And I literally had Marina on the house phone on one end, and then I had my cell phone in the other hand, and just sort of recorded the message like that. And I thought that it was so extremely powerful and genuine and heartfelt. And of course, I played it for my aunt when I got back to Miami. And I thought about that message for a very long time, and thinking about how maybe it could inspire some kind of piece or some kind of research or something art related. And I sat on it for about a year or so until I realized that really what what's most powerful about it is just the recording in and of itself. It doesn't need to be changed. And I think so many times as an artist, yes, I'm a maker. I think so many of us that define ourselves as artists are makers. But at the same time, it often becomes a question of recontextualization, right? It's just sort of taking something that you find to be powerful and relevant and important, and then just situating it in a completely different place. So I decided, well, the recording is it. And I put subtitles on it so it could be shared with an English-speaking population. And again, thinking about these ideas of how memories can be elastic and shaped and evolved, and no matter how much they change, they still remain our reality. Just go forward along here. So video is one of the many mediums that I work in. And as I have mentioned at the beginning of this text, or this talk, text and language has become something that I'm just so obsessed with. Growing up in a family that placed such an emphasis on reading and on books and on language and correct grammar, knowing where your accents would go in Spanish. It's something that I now think about on a daily basis. And having grown up bicultural in Miami is something that I live every day in Boston. And so I'm going to go ahead and just play just a short clip from this piece here. Just kind of scroll to the middle of it so you guys get more of a flavor, and then I'll talk about it in a second.
Exclusión, separación, creación de la autorización, de acuerdo a las leyes de declaración de no lo condeneré o mi admisión de suficientes hechos puede tener consecuencias de deportación, exclusión de admisión de los Estados Unidos o negación de la autorización de acuerdo con las leyes de los Estados Unidos. También entiendo que si el autorización.
So this piece is called Practically Inevitable. And it's taken from the guilty plea form that people in court have to fill out whenever they are pleading guilty to a crime. And so on that form, they sort of sign off recognizing that they are willingly giving up all of their rights to a trial, their right to remain silent, their right to have a trial before a judge, before a jury. And so one of the things they sign off on is that document can also result in their deportation. So in Massachusetts, when you plead guilty to a crime, it can result, if you're not a US citizen, in your deportation, in your prohibition from entering the United States, denial of a citizenship application. And a few years ago, there was an additional paragraph included on there that said, if the crime you are pleading to under federal law is something that might trigger your deportation and the federal government seeks your deportation, it is practically inevitable that this guilty plea will in fact result in that deportation, denial of entry, or denial of citizenship application. And so it's something that I and so many interpreters I know in the court system often have to read through at a very rapid pace. And oftentimes when people plead guilty to a crime, their attorneys are going over those forms with them, sort of just maybe even in the hallway before these proceedings happen. And so thinking about the weight of this language and what happens to it when it's translated, what happens to it when you have something that is so powerful and heavy, but at the same time becomes kind of cut and pasted, sort of routine almost, and in that sense, disposable. So the people you see in this video are all real interpreters in the Boston area, And so they are each reciting that, that particular portion of the guilty plea form in Haitian Creole, Mandarin, Spanish, Arabic. So increasingly, a lot of the work I've been making has occurred in the public space. And as I said at the beginning of this talk, really, I thought to myself how years ago doing text was something that I felt really intimidated by. I remember even being in high school and Mr. Hunter, one of my art teachers, saying how there was another student that had one sketchbook for all of her drawing stuff and then another sketchbook for all of her text stuff. And even that, I felt like this nervousness hearing that, thinking like, how could you really work in text and write and do something that's meaningful to people? And I have increasingly been moving in the direction of making texts, and not only just in my sketchbook or on my drawing table, but just putting it completely out in the world for everybody to see. So what you see here is, and I'm going to zoom in on it in just a sec. This was a collaboration, not a collaboration, but sort of an initiative that I was invited to participate in by the Somerville Arts Council and Area Gallery, led by David Guerra. And so here, if you look closely, these are texts as part of the installation I did here called "Do You Understand What I'm Saying?" So these were a series of questions that I have encountered in court proceedings. A long time ago, I started keeping kind of this list, this question bank of all of these questions that were asked in court, from judges to defendants or from attorneys to their clients. And I started to kind of look through all these and made this list of them and focused on questions that were in some way intimidating or sowed some kind of doubt. And so I put these all into this piece and installed them right in front of the CBS in Davis Square in Somerville. And again, one of the things I've been really interested in is the subversion of language in the public space. And the red that you see there was chosen to match the red in the CBS sign and also in the Boston Sports Club sign next door. So kind of this idea of like, wait, does it belong to CBS or is it Boston Sports Club or not? And what's exactly going on here? So interestingly enough, this piece went up in 2018, and by pure coincidence, it went up just around the time that the Brett Kavanaugh hearings were going on. This is a close-up. If you look closely behind it, there's a series of drawings, and those are texts that are inspired by testimonies and responses that were given to a lot of these intimidating questions. And so kind of thinking about this idea of the officialdom impeding the voice of the unofficial. So this drawing here is part of a series I started last year. I was an artist in residence at Lugar a Dudas, which is a cultural center in Cali, Colombia. And that was a particularly fruitful time for me. And these series of drawings that I'm about to share with you are ones I made just kind of sort of getting to know the neighborhood I was in. I would walk out of the residence where all the artists live, and under my arm I would have a stack of tracing paper. I'd have a big graphite stick, and then I just kind of started to create these rubbings of signs in the public space. In a way, it was just kind of creating this sort of different legibility for what I would see around me, but then also at the same time just kind of getting to know that neighborhood a little bit. the more I would do these, at first they were just kind of rubbings as signs as I encountered them. But then the more I did this, I started to cut and paste little things together. And so, for example, this one takes letters from other sources and says no vale, meaning it's not okay, or it's not worthy. Here, adecuado, meaning adequate or sufficient. One of the signs I encountered was this one, in Cali Energía, which is the energy company. And so this kind of led to a particularly interesting story and an interesting installation I'll share with you. As I started to piece together these different words, the letters in Cali Energía could also be scrambled to say Cali Negra. So in Cali, there is this mountaintop called or hilltop rather, called El Cerro de las Tres Cruces. So it's the hilltop of the three crosses. And so the legend is that in the 19th century, when Cali was experiencing a lot of famine and disease and fires and crime, it was thought that a demon had covered the city with un sombrero negro, with a black hat. And so in order to solve that problem, these three friars climbed the hilltop and they placed these three crosses there in order to trap this demon inside. Now, it wasn't these specific three crosses, but that's later what was built there. And now it's just, it's sort of a kind of Sunday pastime for people, where people go up and hike to the top. There's masses given at the top. It's an hour up, an hour down. You have these beautiful views of the city. But it really got me thinking about kind of this idea of darkness and what role that legend played in Cali's history. And so I made this. And what this is again, thinking about these ideas of subverting language in the public space. I was able to have made a replica of one of the Cali Energía signs, and a sewer cover was removed and swiped out with this piece. And if you are ever in Cali, this is still there. It's in front of Lugar a Dudas. And so, again, just kind of creating situations where people encounter something textual that is completely unexpected. Also, Cali for me, I think it was really interesting because I thought a lot about Ana Mendieta while I was there, who's one of my heroes. And Ana Mendieta, it was said that her time in Mexico was extremely fruitful for her. And kind of, thinking about how Mexico, for her, if I can privilege myself to relate to Ana Mendieta in that sense, was kind of not quite Cuba, but it wasn't quite the US either. It was sort of this third place. And for me, Cali reminded me a lot of Miami. And then there were also just kind of a handful of things that also felt very Cuban to me. One of the things I found most interesting there is there's sort of this rhythmic description of Cali by caleños, where people often say Cali es caliente or Cali es cálida. And so kind of thinking of these C words to describe Cali, I made this list, especially considering a lot of things in Cali's history, having read Cali Calabozo by Andrés Caicedo, who's one of that town's prominent sons. I made this exhaustive list of adverbs, everything from Cali contada, cuestionada, conformada, corrobada, and everything I could think of that started with C, and this wrapped around the facade of the cultural center. Now, that brings me to my next and current project that I'd like to share with you guys tonight, which is No es fácil, it ain't easy. So as Greer had mentioned, this year I'm one of the accelerator fellows with Now and There, which is an organization that facilitates public art projects in the Boston area. And so I had started developing ideas for a project early in 2020. And again, was just really interested in subverting language in the public space. I was interested in working in communities that had a high concentration of immigrants, especially Spanish-speaking immigrants. And I took photos of so many things that interested me, ranging from stickers in barbershop windows, to awnings at bodegas, to wheat-pasted posters for concerts, banners for restaurants, and was thinking about all these things. And billboards were sort of kind of on my horizon. But let's say they, out of all these choices, or maybe choice F or G. And once this pandemic set in, I thought to myself, well, what public art project? What public? And so then settled on billboards as a way to really be able to reach people and do it in a way that was considerate of social distancing measures and not need to have people come together and do anything that required people in the presence of each other. And so I said, well, what else? Also thinking about the role of the artist in this time, right? And what is it that art can offer, and what can artists do? And so having on the one hand in mind these ideas of subverting public space and sharing language, and then on the other hand, thinking about what can be offered, I kept coming back to this phrase, no es fácil, which no matter where it's said in the Spanish-speaking world, it always means it ain't easy or it's not easy. But especially in the Cuban vernacular, it's something I grew up with, hearing a lot in Miami. You hear it in Havana. You can be standing in line for something, and then someone's just going to turn around and look at you and just say like, no es fácil, and just this kind of throwing you a line of solidarity of I got you. And so I started developing these phrases. All of them start with no es fácil or have no es fácil included in them in some configuration. And then also thinking about other things. I had been reading Blindness by Jose Saramago, The Plague by Camus, The Last Man by Mary Shelley, and all of these works of literature, these iconic works that were written during times of pandemics, and thinking about what could be offered to the population in terms of these texts. So these are going up around Boston. The process started in July and will continue until January. This was the first one to go up, No es fácil, pero no te desesperes, which this is in East Boston, just over the bridge from Chelsea. It's a bilingual series, so some are in Spanish, some are in English. This one is right in Rosendale Square. And actually, the color palette is it's a little bit retro, a little bit pastel-y. One of the many things I was inspired by was actually the Necco Sweetheart candies, which are the New England candy company, little hearts that come around Valentine's Day, and kind of playing around with this idea of just grazing against the cheesy and the poignant, and kind of existing in that little realm between the two of them. This one is also in Rosendale, kind of further down. They were also further down on Washington Street. And all of these were, they've all been situated in areas where there's a significant immigrant population, especially Spanish-speaking immigrants, which unfortunately are also the neighborhoods that have been most affected by the coronavirus. So thinking about essential workers, thinking about having people just come across these messages, which, as you can see on them, my name's not on it, now and theirs name isn't on it. And especially when they're next to something like Geico motorcycles, really playing around with this idea of whether or not it's an ad. Is it something that's going to be sold? Is it something that's being sold now? So, no es fácil, pero tú tranqui, sort of a soft, slangy way of saying, hey, it ain't easy, but you just keep calm. The blue one I had shown earlier is it ain't easy, but don't despair. This one, que madera, pero hágale, is up in East Boston. It's right above Casa Colombia, which in my opinion are the best empanadas in town. And it's a very Colombian saying, and in this part of East Boston there is a very significant Colombian population, and that's something that has also been considered for these billboards, is the neighborhood that they are in, and really trying to tap into just a little bit of the cultures that make up these neighborhoods. And so, que mamera pero hágale is like saying, what a pain, but let's do it. These are all still up around town. And then, also with these billboards, there have been a couple other initiatives I'm just going to quickly mention. My wife and I have designed a series of t-shirts that have these phrases. There's 4 different ones. There's 2 sweatshirts and 2 t-shirts. One just kind of as a way to circulate these messages in a different way. They, that being worn by somebody can kind of be anywhere and really get into the bloodstream of the community. But also, they are all the proceeds from all of those t-shirts and sweatshirts with these sayings are going to really powerful organizations. One of them is Walk to Walk, which is a Get Out the Vote organization that works especially in swing states in Black and Latinx communities. Another is Sisters Unchained, that works with the young women that have an incarcerated parent. That's a local organization. They operate in Massachusetts. And then the Mira Coalition, which is also a local organization that helps immigrants and refugees, and is a really big advocacy organization. And so all of the proceeds from the sales of these t-shirts go toward that. So on the one hand, sort of this way of kind of thinking about Jane Holzer and her influence on my work and how she used to put messages on hats and condom wrappers, but also just kind of incentivizing people to donate, especially in this perilous time that we're living in. I think whenever people come across these in their ambiguity, I hope that when they see these billboards, there is that little bit of confusion of wondering what exactly is this? But my hope is that whether it's something big or small, it's just kind of that thing that someone needed to hear in their day. So with that, thank you again, everybody, for joining me tonight. Just a couple of things. At Studio Gabriel Sosa is my Instagram. If you're interested in getting in touch, talking, if you want to donate and grab one of these shirts, just hit me up on Instagram. A couple other places where my work is currently being shown right now, but I just wanted to give these folks a shout out. Creating in COVID is an online exhibition curated by Rachel Kay, who's a local curator and is primarily local Boston-based artist. And then Pesorovi 19, which is organized by Aeropuerto Laboratorio. They are based in Mexico and are a sound art collective. I have some work in there, and it's also a virtual exhibition, En Proyecciones para el Sereno, which is projections for the night air. by Líneas Rojas Producciones. It is a collective that's near and dear to my heart because they very much specialize in language and subverting the public space with it. And that opens up, there's a series of projections at the Museo La Tertulia in Cali, in Colombia, opening this Friday. And have some work in there as well. But do check out all these folks. And again, thank you, Greer. Thank you, Boston College.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. That was really wonderful. We're a little over time, but if anyone has questions, please put them in the Q&A. And I have a brief little question for you about one of your pieces, because I think a lot of how I interpret your work, which is so lovely and powerful, is like a lot of the things that get lost in translation. And you have a lot of different treatments, and a lot of it is like layering and losing things in the layers and confusing in the layers, right? And for the Practically Inevitable, the video piece, which is actually like one of the first things I think I met you when you installed that show, actually. Can you talk a little bit about like the layering of that and how it's kind of, I mean, personally, I think it's a little overwhelming with all of those voices going on, and like why you chose to make it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I chose to make it that way just because it's really hard to get through the noise. And I think maybe that's something that a lot of us can relate to just in daily life, dealing with emails, phone, Zoom, everything in the world that's going on around you, but then just kind of thinking about the courtroom, right? And how so many proceedings I interpret simultaneously. So I'm simultaneously going from English into Spanish, and someone is listening to that, and I'm hearing the ambient English, right? So kind of constantly having all these things going on, and then depending on how loud that volume is turned up in the defendant's headphones, they may also hear these other things, and they may not even have headphones at all. So kind of tapping into that literalness, and also just more the figurativeness of how there is also so many voices and opinions in the courtroom and in the justice system, or legal system, I should say, since it's not that just.
It's opaque at best, it seems, right? Are there any questions from any of I know it's getting late, so
yeah, I realize I went over a little bit. Sorry about that.
No worries. Well, Gabriel, thank you. Oh, we have one from Seth Vander Eames and one from Sheila. He says, can you talk about how you see language demarcating and creating spaces for community members?
That's a really good question. Thank you, Seth. It's a hard one to answer. How do I see it demarcating and creating spaces for community members? Well, I mean, one thing, actually just last night, we gave a workshop, I and Sara Rivera, who is another artist, formerly based in Boston, now in New Mexico. And what we did is we had everybody respond to a series of prompts, and using the results of that writing, we then chose certain phrases to be printed on postcards. And so those phrases are going to be printed on the postcards, and every participant in that workshop is going to get like a little pack with stamped postcards, also supporting USPS, to share however they see fit. And so that's kind of one way I'm thinking about community and language and creating some kind of space.
So art big and small, and like yes to the USPS, right? That actually leads to our next question from Sheila Gallagher, who says, thank you so much. And she says, where can we get the t-shirts? And what was the name of the third organization you mentioned, who are immigrant advocacy groups, which this is a great, can I get those in writing from you later? Because I would love to share that with.
Yes, and you can hit me up on Instagram. And one of the most recent posts, I think it's maybe the last post, has those organizations mentioned. So they say it right on there, and you can click and check them out.
So cool. Thank you so much for that. And Sheila says thank you too. All right, Celine Loom, one of our all-star alumnus. I may have missed you mention this, but you were the most influenced with your work. But who are you the most influenced with your work? You mentioned Ana Mendieta.
Yeah, Ana Mendieta is a big one, a really big one. I think also Glenn Ligon is one. And then also, you know, artists whose work I really love and have become friends. Abigail Reyes is one. Nicolás Consuegra is another one. Love a lot of folks. Jenny Halser, we've also I also talked a little bit about tonight.
Yeah. So I can see a little bit of all of that in there for sure. Any last questions? Well, we'll call it because it's getting late.
Okay.
Gabriel, thank you so much for kicking off our season.
Thank you again.
Even in this format, I think this was lovely. Again, for everyone who's still here, we have Maria Maltini on the 12th of November and Anna Siapsis on November 19th. And, you know, a virtual clap, 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 clap for Gabriel. This is lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.